Ladies and gentlemen, it's time to debate. And before we jump into the competition, allow me to introduce the speakers on each team. From side proposition, you'd have heard that we have Victoria Jubilee Hospital. The first speaker is Deandra Facey. We also have on the team as second speaker, Desireen Denton Sadler. And the third speaker is Chantal Blair Gooden. In opposition, we have the Jamaica Information Service, and the first speaker is Peter Gay Hodges. Our second speaker is Charnel Henry. And our third speaker, Twyla Whelan. Twyla Whelan. My apologies, Twyla. All right, ladies and gentlemen, so at this point in time, the teams are very aware of the times for each speaker. And so let me invite Deandra Facey to open the debate, and she will be followed by the first speaker on side opposition, Peter Gay Hodges. It's time to debate.
Mr. Chairman, my worthy opponents, good morning. In the words of the Executive Director of Caribbean Maritime Institute, he rightly says, the greatest threat to the environment is not development, but rather the hungry people who have no means to provide for themselves. And in so, we define environmental development, according to Collins Dictionary, as concerned with the protection of the natural world, land, air, and sea. Development as an act of something becoming more advanced or stronger. An obstacle is something material or immaterial that slows progress. Economic development or economic growth is defined as an increase in the market value of goods and services. Mr. Speaker, when you think of environmental development, the average man thinks of infrastructure. But by definition for environmental, we posit the proposition that it has to do with approaches to preserve the natural environment. And in simply so, the mood should be read. Be it resolved that advancing the protection of the natural world, land, sea, and air impedes the natural value of the market value of the goods and services provided. As first speaker, I will be focusing on the utilization of our natural resources. The second speaker will be discussing infrastructure, and the third speaker will be highlighting industrialization. Mr. Speaker, World Atlas lauds Jamaica as having a rich natural capital, which includes our natural physical resources, such as land, forestry, water being the largest, and our minerals, bauxite, silica sand, gypsum, oil, and gas, just to name a few. Mr. Speaker, to date, our natural and physical environment, natural capital itself, provides 28.8% of the GDP and has increased since 1986 from a meager 13.4. This means that we should utilize it more. Mr. Speaker, natural capital has a direct connection between environmental growth. Thus, it is undeniable to say that our exploitation or utilization of the natural capital will grow the economy, and not using the natural capital is therefore an obstacle. Natural capital is integral to the development of countries as it provides investments, services, monetary backing that will cause us to have a developed country by 2030, I posit. What are we really safeguarding, Mr. Speaker? We are safeguarding the potential for Jamaica to actualize its developmental potential by the year 2030. I am simply saying, Mr. Speaker, that natural capital should be utilized, has economic value, and not utilizing it is an obstacle to environmental development. Now, according to Trading Economics, Jamaica has an average 3,552 square kilometers of forest sitting around doing nothing. According to tree huggers, that is somehow important. But I posit this morning, Mr. Speaker, that through use of agroforestry, ecotourism, Jamaica can tap into US $77 to $210 million. Mr. Speaker, to rob the economy, the local market, the local and rural communities of this investment, of this income generation, of this training of its people is robbery. It is a crime, Mr. Speaker. It is an obstacle to economic growth. The economy grows when a country utilizes its natural resources. If we have 30% forest coverage sitting around idly, people hugging trees, that is an obstacle. Let us use it for something more positive, Mr. Speaker. What am I saying? Tapping into this natural resource is a gold mine, and the lack thereof is an obstacle. Mr. Speaker, Jamaica has lots of minerals, and notably we all know of bauxite and silica mining. Globally, it is needed to create the infrastructure for many, many buildings. Now, if we expand our bauxite mining and quarry industry, Mr. Speaker, by at least 45%, I posit that this can cause income generation, employment opportunities, training for the local people in and around the area to grow the economy. The lack thereof, the non-utilization, non-expansion becomes an obstacle. And environment is important to economic growth. If we do not use it as a country, we are therefore, in our mindsets, have already created an insurpassable obstacle. Accepted.
You mentioned that we haven't been developing bauxite, but what would you say about the recent acquisition of Alpart by Gisco and the earnings that have been actually
Time. Excellent point, my opponents. That's exactly what I'm saying. 45% more expansion cannot kill us. It will grow us. Now, in areas such as St. Elizabeth and Manchester, which she alluded to, providing employment for at least 1,686 persons per use of the bauxite mining areas. Mr. Speaker, I'm simply saying, as my learned friends alluded to, preserving these mineral-rich lands robs Jamaica of billions. The Prime Minister himself said that not exploiting our bauxite mining areas loses Jamaica billions of dollars in US. I posit to you that if we expand by 45% more by 2030 to actualize our developmental goals, we will develop Jamaica. Mr. Speaker, through utilization of our coastal areas. Now, notably, we know that 70% of our business and service industries are alongside our coastal areas. I posit to you that if we expand at least by 50% more, we will see growth in our tourism and aquaculture. Now, fishing industry by itself is a $250 million mega industry that we're underutilizing. What really are we preserving by saying that we should not build more hotels, build more villas, inviting visitors into the island? The Minister of Tourism says that Jamaica will be estimated to carry in at least $3 to $4 billion by 2020. Now, Mr. Speaker, if we do not utilize these natural resources, utilize our coastlines, let us say if we were to consider slightly preserving them, what does it benefit us? Not much. I posit that through environmental use of our resources, that through development, we can move forward, and not using them adequately, which we have not, is an obstacle. An obstacle makes it more difficult for progress to occur. I thank you.
Madam Chairman, distinguished guests, worthy opponents, I rise to oppose the moot, be it resolved that environmental development is an obstacle to economic growth. Before I begin, however, Madam Chairman, we are challenging the definition of environmental development. We are of the view that environmental development must include infrastructural development, aka the built environment. Let me address a few things raised by my opponent. 45%, my opponent, is very ambitious, and we must crawl before we can walk. You speak of not using natural capital. Might I point out that income generation of the natural environment is indeed needed, however, it must be done responsibly. You spoke of increasing mining at Gisco, increasing mining by a large percentage. We will just remind you that Gisco Alpart has in fact, GISCO has taken over the Alpart plant, and a special economic zone is actually being set up in that area. However, the infrastructure must be put in place for 50% growth to be realized. We submit, Mr. Chairman, that environmental development, which is necessary for growth, is not an obstacle to economic growth, but rather sustainable environmental development actually drives economic growth. We are bound by the very international conventions that we have signed on to, as well as self-imposed legislation, which makes our environmental development not a hindrance to economic growth, but rather an asset. It could only be a hindrance if done irresponsibly and in contravention of the conventions and the laws of the land. Let's discuss the sustainable development goals that relate to the environment. Number 9, industry, innovation, and infrastructure. We are to build resilient infrastructure, promote inclusive and sustainable industrialization, and foster innovation like Digicel's climate smart building. Number 11, sustainable cities and communities. We're to build inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable cities and communities. We could speak of number 13, climate action. Number 14, life below water. And we will discuss water a little bit more shortly. I'll address how the government has laid the legislative framework for sustainable development. Second speaker will tackle how environmental development facilitates growth, and the third speaker will highlight how environmental development contributes to employment and therefore economic growth. We are governed by at least 10 environmental protection acts, such as the Natural Resources Conservation Act, the Beach Control Act, the Watersheds Prevention Act. But friends, if we do not develop our environment, our competitors will. Dropping the ball on the dredging of the Kingston Harbour would have paid to Jamaica's ability to dock post-Panamax ships at the port of Kingston. Post-Panamax is any ship which is of the largest size that can be accommodated in the newly expanded Panama Canal, therefore bringing additional shipping business. The Dominican Republic, in preparation for the post-Panamax era, expanded the port of Cocido to almost double its capacity. The new berth is equipped with 3 Super Panamax cranes because they saw beyond and developed futuristic plans. Super Panamax is actually exceeding the existing capacity of the Panama Canal. If that were not enough to convince you, the new port of Mariel in Cuba was built and dredged to 18 meters or 60 feet, enabling it to accommodate Super Panamax vessels. You see, friends, we must harness our God-given competitive advantage of location. A ship en route from Asia and sailing through the Panama Canal, if traveling in a straight line due north, would run aground in Jamaica if not stopped. And we all know the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. So in achieving our goal of receiving post-Panamax ships, the Kingston Harbour was dredged, but certain requirements had to be fulfilled. Environment manager on the dredging project, Vanden Bogart, told journalists that all potential impacts of the dredging were laid out in an environmental impact assessment and subsequently defined in a permit issued by NEPA. Among the stipulations, not anchoring in coral or among seagrasses, installing a heavy-duty silt curtain and turbidity curtain, and triggering an alarm if turbidity levels were too high, and setting the level even above that of Florida. Head of the Maritime Authority of Jamaica, Rear Admiral Peter Brady, is quick to point out that 95% of Jamaica's trade is done by sea, and with Jamaica preparing to improve its offering of services to traveling ships, such as dry docking, bunkering, and crewing, the time is apt to discuss the reality of harnessing the blue economy. 61% of the population live within 5 kilometers of the coast, and the ocean is full of potential for economic growth, with territorial waters that are 23 times our landmass. Bearing this in mind, Transport Minister Robert Montague, at a recent symposium for Caribbean tourism ministers, spoke of the government implementing legislative measures aimed at supporting a sustainable blue economy as a key driver of economic growth. He cited the recent passage of the ballast water legislation aimed at preventing ships from entering Jamaica's waters from introducing foreign species and diseases into the maritime environment. The point, friends, is anywhere you turn, you're going to run into some law or convention that protects the environment. Environmental development in Jamaica cannot be an obstacle to economic growth, as
Point of
structures
information.
have been put in place both locally and internationally to preserve the environment from degradation.
Point of information. The proposition posits that these resources that you're speaking of have to be utilized for economic growth, and the lack thereof is an obstacle.
And we're saying that it has to be done responsibly. Let us examine the decision where the government, according to the Jamaica Observer, opted to forego billions in earning possibilities by not mining in the cockpit country. The Prime Minister said, and I quote, "The area is too valuable in terms of its ecological and hydrological importance to allow mining, which may result in permanent and irreversible harm," end quote. He admitted that the decision to forego the exploitation of the area would cost the country millions of tons of high-grade minerals, with potential earnings of billions of US dollars. However, he said that the government could not put a price tag on the loss to the country's water resources and biodiversity. It must be done sustainably. A similar occurrence took place with Goat Island being put backwards. Let's face it, you cannot touch the environment without even getting a permit. If you're going to build even on your own land, you must get a permit from the parish council. You have to put in a floor plan, foundation plan, septic tank, tile plan. Everything must be there, and it must be shared with the health and fire departments. We're saying it can be done, but it must be done responsibly. Thank you.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we heard from the first speaker of the government that natural capital has a direct connection with environmental growth, with economic growth, because it provides investment opportunities and so on. They also highlighted that preserving mineral-rich lands robs Jamaica of millions of dollars. And they question, what really are we preserving by saying that we should not build more hotels and other opportunities along our coasts? But then side opposition comes and they say to us, income generation from the natural environment can be increased, but it must be done responsibly and with due consideration for sustainable development. They also highlight that legislative measures are needed to support the growth of the blue economy, and they even went on to say, look, structures are already in place locally and internationally to prevent the degradation of the environment. So we know that the opening salvos have been laid. So let's go to the second speakers. Let me now invite from the proposition, Desreen Denton Sadler, to continue the motion that has been opened in their name, and then we'll get the response from the second speaker from side opposition, Charnel Henry. Let's make them welcome.
Good morning. Mr. Speaker, before I proceed into my presentation, I'd like to challenge the challenge of the opposition, which we found not to be so much of a challenge as so much of an agreement with us. Because my first speaker did say that development, that environment includes land, air, and sea. Land is infrastructure. And she did say that I'll be focusing on infrastructure. I'll do that for you later. You went on to say that the environment can generate income if development is being done responsibly. That's what we're saying. We're saying to you that the approach that is taken to develop the environment is one that, if done responsibly, will grow the economy. If it's not being done responsibly, which is what we're saying, then it poses an obstruction to growth. Right? Now then, Mr. Speaker, as my colleague said, I'll be focusing on how infrastructural approaches
Point of information.
have been, just a minute, an obstacle to economic growth. The approach, we're saying, the approach that has been taken to preserve the environment, particularly as it relates to infrastructure, has been an obstacle to economic growth. Take for an example, the recent ban on single-use plastic bags, straws, and polystyrene. Mr. Speaker, this ban sees the government and manufacturers spending a whole lot more for the alternative to plastic straws alone. So when asked about the cost of plastic
Points of
straws
information.
compared to, let me finish this point, compared to the paper alternative, Adam Meran, CEO of Packnwood, which is a food service products company, he responded that, and I quote, "You're looking at maybe 10 times the cost. A paper straw costs about 2.5 cents, a plastic straw costs ½ cent, end quote. Yes, madam.
You mentioned earlier that land and infrastructure are one and the same, but land is a natural resource. What do you say to this? Infrastructure is built and developed. It's an addition.
All right, my darling, when I continue, you will understand exactly what I mean. Please follow closely. Mr. Speaker, it is our position that if the money that is being invested to transition from use of plastic to paper was invested into building a recycling plant, then this would serve to boost the economy and not drain it of its already sparse resources. The thing is, the ban, it affects everybody, and especially the common man. Now, Plastic Makers Agri and Industrial Packaging Limited, they had to cut 1/5 of their workforce, or 20 of their 100 staff, just because of this ban. Mr. Speaker, that is 20 persons whose main means of providing for their families has been taken away, as opposed to the hundreds or thousands of jobs that could be created by constructing a plant for recycling. This would cause unemployment levels to dip even further, which would boost our economy. The fact of the matter is, we're trying to put a Band-Aid over the fact that people are blatantly disregarding the anti-litter laws. Mr. Speaker, if it is protection of our marine life and a reduction in garbage pollution that we're seeking to achieve, then the plastic to paper is not necessarily the best option. See, a world report of 2014 states that at least 1/4 of the waste shipped to landfills comprised paper. Why does the opposition then continue to support the stopping the use of materials that can be fueled into a dedicated recycle stream? Mr. Speaker, already approximately $30 million has been spent on just educating the public about this ban. That is $30 million that could have contributed to a recycling plant. Furthermore, the bans in plastic, it has been attempted in many countries. 2 of such are Kenya and Bangladesh. And these are countries that have more resources than Jamaica to enforce and ensure that this ban is maintained. No, for the first year or so, circulation decreased. But following that, circulation of these resources, these things came back with a vengeance. Now, Mr. Speaker, if this is where we're going, then we will not be able to realize our goal number 4 of Vision 2030, which you spoke of, Madam Opposition. Mr. Speaker, we have to be proactive in our planning and implementation of economic growth initiatives, and we have to turn deaf ears to the naysayers. When we tabled the construction of our major roadways in Parliament, we had naysayers. They said we would lose our forestry and our vegetation if the highways were built. If we had listened, then some parts of the island would still be disconnected from other parts, and trade would continue to move at a snail's pace. Now, with the highways, the pace of goods is moving from one place to another in a matter of minutes, and transportation is more efficient, causing goods and sales of goods to largely impact the GDP. Mr. Speaker, if our cups are empty, how can we pour into somebody else's? We need to move to a place where we truly own the resources that are around us. We need to bubble up, man. We need to chase the opposition out of here with their trickle-down mentality. Opposition, you have come here today to mislead and disempower the public. But we are saying to you, bubble up or shuffle out. What am I saying then, Mr. Speaker? I have presented to you, citing examples, right? 2 approaches that have been taken to preserve our environment. One that has proven to fail, and the other that has proven to boost our environment. Jamaicans are not idiots. They know to choose right. Mr. Speaker, we're bubbling up. Bubble with us, man. Thank you.
Judges, my opponents, ladies and gentlemen, we, the opposition, do not believe and we will not accept that environmental development is an obstacle to economic growth. I will show you how environmental development actually facilitates economic growth, and as such, it cannot be an obstacle to it, and also paint for you a picture of a Jamaica without environmental development. Before, let me just address some matters raised by the proposition. It seems that they lack real vision on side
proposition. You see, we are just in the first phase of the plastic ban, and I gather that you're unaware of the fact that the plastic bottle or producers rather have placed a self-imposed cess on themselves, which will go towards the Recycling Partners of Jamaica, spearheading a national recycling program. We're just in phase 1. Give them some time now. Just some time, and you will see the real benefit. We cannot by any means ignore the value of the environment around us just for development. That is why side opposition is saying that we need to develop the environmental sustainably, and then we will see even more economic growth. And I find also that the proposition agrees with us in that. Let us look at the tourism industry for a brief moment. An area that, not at this moment, an area that significantly contributes to economic growth. Minister of Tourism Ed Bartlett said that last year we recorded $3.3 billion in foreign exchange earnings. And he said that in the next 3 years, we will be building 18,517 rooms. Now, these rooms, these additional hotel rooms, will not be floating in the air. They have to be built somewhere. They will be a part of the environmental development along the coastline. And additional
Point of information.
that we can accommodate more tourists, we can have more visitors, and more visitors means more foreign exchange for the country.
Point of information.
Accepted.
Your third speaker highlighted that your first speaker or second speaker highlighted that land infrastructure and land is separate. So what are you saying that we build on? You're contradicting yourselves, my
Thank you very much.
opponents.
You build on the resource that is land. Infrastructure is what you put on the resource. Thank you. Jamaica's road networks have come a mighty long way. The roads are conduits to life's activities and contribute to economic growth themselves. Having developed road infrastructure improves countries' efficiency in transportation of goods across the island. Roads take farm produce from the farm to the market, children to school, and connects the population to such services like health and employment. Additionally, you would recall the government projecting an economic growth rate of up to 2.9% per annum. Guess where that will be driven from?
Point of information.
Not at this moment. It will be driven from agriculture and fisheries, hotels and restaurants, mining and quarrying. And there's no way that economic growth can be driven in these sectors without environmental development.
Point of information.
There must be infrastructure placed in these areas for us to exploit the environment sustainably. Additionally, do not forget the government of Jamaica has been making responsible decisions as it concerns our environment and our economic development, and they will continue to do so. This is evident in the importation of 5 LNG fueled JUTC
Point of information.
in a pilot program to use cleaner fuel in government vehicles. There's also the establishment
Point of
the
information.
not at this moment, the Wigton Wind Farm, which is the largest clean renewable energy facility in the English-speaking Caribbean. There's also the use of solar energy at the Norman Manley International Airport, where planes switch over to solar power when they park at the gates. That, my friend, is satisfying United Nations Sustainable Development Goal 7 of affordable, clean energy. Now,
Point of information.
accepted.
The Wigton wind farm that you mentioned, it only accounts for 5% of energy. How does that equate to affordable energy for the populace?
It's a start, my opponent. We start with 5%, but we cannot end at 5%. Wait a little and see where we go with it. The wind is blowing, and the wind of change will be blowing anybody who does not believe in the wind of change. Now, take a moment and picture with me.
Point of information.
At this point, I just took one. Jamaica without environmental development. Joan and Winston are 2 Jamaicans living in rural Jamaica in a 2-bedroom house with 9 family members. Joan has an affinity for organization and an eye for detail, but she works as a cashier at the only supermarket in town. And Winston can pull apart anything and fix it back once you put it in front of him, but he works as hired help on Mas Joe's farm. Both of them are unable to fulfill their career potential because of a lack of educational training opportunities and available jobs. So their work don't match up to their skills. Then the word around town is that Jamaica Hotels Company will be building another inland hotel, bringing the country's hotel total to 3, a grand total of 3. And guess what? the hotel is approved to have 60 rooms. That's 20 more rooms than the existing hotels. Can you imagine? What a pity. Only people, though, who live near the hotel can get this job. And once a week, Hyacinth rises way before Mass Joe Rooster, walks with her bottle torch to catch the one Southern King country bus to town. And that's no less than a 3 hours drive. She has to catch that same bus back to country her dog named her supper. Listen, ladies and gentlemen, I'm painting the picture of what Jamaica will look like if we had no highways, if we had no jobs being built outside, being created outside of Kingston. Listen, you need to have these because this is not the Jamaica we want. We don't want to go back to the time of low economic growth to a lack of development of our environment. Thank you.
So we want to thank Proposition Second Speaker, Desiree Denton Sadler, and the Opposition Second Speaker, Charnel Henry. So, ladies and gentlemen, let us now hear from the third speakers who will be taking the final substantive arguments on behalf of the teams. I'll invite from side Proposition, Chantal Blair Gooden, and she'll be followed by Twyla Whelan, the third speaker of side Opposition. Let's make them welcome.
Distinguished guests, honorable judges, good morning. Mr. Speaker, I think Team Opposition is confused about their role today in defending the moot at hand. What we are actually saying is that no logical, forward-thinking person would come here to argue that making the environment better, just aesthetics, is more, and making it more attractive, is an obstacle to economic growth. So let us educate our learning opponents. Though we cannot ignore environmental degradation in hopes of chasing the future, in hopes of chasing growth in the future, we cannot neglect growth and leave the poor in their misery while trying to save the planet. In a comment raised by Ralston Hyman, a leader commentator, he stated that poverty is the greatest threat to the Jamaican environment, so we cannot therefore afford to look at gift horse in the mouth. What am I therefore saying, my opponents? In order to have a clear vision of Jamaica 2030, we must, as a nation, take an important shift in the way the country does business with the rest of the world and capitalize on the gifts of our natural resources and tropical climates. The economy, Mr. Speaker, is bubbling up. Bubbling with activities
Point of information
of the Logistics Hub initiative, not at this moment, to establish Jamaica as a premier logistics node within the Americas and to capitalize on the trade and business opportunities that has emanated not just from expansion of the Panama Canal, but from Jamaica readily being able to access commercial markets in North, Central, and South America. The Logistics Hub is the initiative that is geared towards this transformation of the Jamaican economy to achieve sustainable economic growth, which has eluded us for many years.
Point of information.
Go ahead.
Are you aware that we are actually making steps towards creating this logistics hub? It's not something that we just left as a thought.
But my opponents, you are opposing the moot, and this is what we are saying. We have been taking the steps. We have been putting in the funding. We have been doing what is necessary to grow Jamaica's economy.
Point of information.
It is not something that is coming, as stated by the Caribbean Maritime Institute, Dr. Fitz Pinnock, but it's already here. Already we have international ports. People are doing business. We're adding value. However, what we need is to expand this in a way that we can create greater value for Jamaica, end quote. Mr. Speaker, the government of Jamaica has adopted a multi-pronged approach in the implementation of the Logistics Hub initiative. The scope of the Logistics Hub will include, but will not be limited to rehabilitation of the existing infrastructure, such as the Kingston Wharves expansion.
Point of information.
Development of new infrastructure, such as the Cayman Special Economic Zones facilities, and it also includes connecting road, railway, air, and digital communications. In return, we have been seeing, Mr. Speaker, career development through education, job creation, business opportunities and technology transfer between multinational corporations and local operators.
Point of information.
This is what we are aiming to achieve, my opponents. A bubbling up in our economy. My opponents in 2017, Kingston Wharves Limited, in expansion invested US $15 million to create a part of the state-of-the-art logistics complex. It has therefore proven to be beneficial to not just business owners, but also to the small householders.
Point of information.
Benefiting them in reducing wait time and efficiency from clearing barrels and containers. My opponents, the logistics center has been facilitating domestic motor vehicle imports, which have increased by approximately 36% since 2015 to date, due to its continued investment in logistics. What does this mean? It means an increase in revenues, which the director of Kingston Wharves highlighted that in the first 6 months of 2018, revenues of over $3 billion was made. This represents over $450 million increase over the corresponding speaker. Mr. Speaker, let us look at Singapore, who gained independence, and they were one of the lowest income countries with limited natural resources. They invested in jobs, Mr. Speaker, and to date, look at Singapore. They are one of the wealthiest nations due in large part to its emergence in the highest performance logistics hub in the region. This is what we are striving to, my opponents. This is what we need to see. So my opponents, let us bubble up in sustained utilization of our natural resources. Let us start bubbling up with excitement for job creation. Let us bubble up with regular staff training to ensure we are keeping up with the new technologies and international standards. Let us bubble up in making conducive investment to climate and developing the right initiatives to private sector participation in order to make Jamaica the place of choice to live, work, and do business. I rest.
Madam Chairman, judges, my worthy opponents, ladies and gentlemen, I rise to oppose the notion that environmental development is an obstacle to economic growth by highlighting how environmental development contributes to employment, can positively impact the environment, and highlight the impact of two major obstacles to economic growth. Now, we've heard a lot of things today, but I want to reiterate where the opposition is coming from, and that is where environmental development incorporates additions to the environment, incorporates building up, expanding for the purpose of economic growth. There has to be a balance, though. It's about sustainability. So I noticed some mentioning of aesthetics and the purpose of the development that we are talking about, but it's not aesthetics when you're improving production, when people can get to work faster when they're building the roads. It's not aesthetics when people are getting jobs from tourism and from development and from all of the jobs being created by building these facilities and these high-rise buildings and so on. It's not aesthetics, and even in the case of aesthetics, we have a tourism product. But let me get into what I have to talk about because I don't have much time. One of the fruits of environmental development, as we see it, is the provision of employment for both persons working on projects and benefiting after their completion. The expansion of existing hotels like Half Moon and Sandals Resorts and the construction of new hotels like Ocean Coral Spring Hotel and S Hotel will create approximately 18,157 rooms. And with the local tourism industry using a ratio of 2.3 employees per room, that would mean 41,761 jobs. And like Tourism Minister Edmund Bartlett said, this doesn't include your bar staff, your pool, your beach attendants, and several other categories of workers. So that's far more than what is projected. So how can new jobs be added and it's considered an obstacle to economic growth when the main purpose of environmental development, as we see it, serves to stimulate employment and commerce? Now, if done right, sustainable environmental development positively impacts the environment. Case in point, the North-South Highway. When last have you been through Fern Gully or the Bogwalk Gorge? Anyone? Well, it may be a while because we have the new highway which removes the heavy traffic from sensitive areas, and these are sensitive areas as the Bogwalk Gorge is considered a protected area within the community. The community of Bogwalk actually falls within the Rio Cobre watershed area. And Fern Gully has been named to
Point of information.
to over 300 species of ferns and other plants. Diverting traffic from these areas to the North-South Highway facilitates the preservation of these delicate ecosystems and stimulates growth through improved transportation. So we've been talking a lot about the relationship between environmental development and economic growth, but there's an important part of the move which looks at obstacles. And I want to talk about the real obstacles here to our economic growth.
Point of information.
Not at this time. In a 2016 Observer article titled Jamaica's Growth, Same Problems, Same Solutions, Dennis Chung says, and I quote, "The top 4 challenges to doing business remain the same year over year, which are in order: crime and theft, inefficient government bureaucracy, tax rates, and corruption," end quote. Now let's take a look at 2 big ticket items. That's corruption and crime. My opponents, if you want to know what an obstacle to economic growth really is, consider that in 2017, then National Security Minister Robert Montague found that crime cost the country roughly $68 billion per year. Last July, opposition leader Dr. Peter Phillips at his party's national executive meeting revealed that the state of emergency affected in St. James cost taxpayers roughly $30 million monthly for its duration. Think on this. There are people in this country who are afraid to stop their shops because they're afraid that thief are going to come and take it out. How can you develop if you're simply too afraid to try? Imagine the people whose walls become barricades for warring gangs, whose houses are perforated with bullets, while inside the hope of our human capital bleed into tomorrow's horrific headline. My learned opponents, environmental development is not the enemy here. It is not an obstacle to economic growth. So, with crime hitting us $6, or should I say $68 billion yearly, how does actual sustainable improvements to our environment begin to compare to an economic killer like crime? It does not. Because where crime seeks to tear down, environmental development like fixing our roads and building schools and developing the blue economy, as mentioned by my second speaker, seek to build up. And when it isn't crime, ladies and gentlemen, here comes corruption like gangrene on an infected limb. Front page of yesterday's Observer, IMF tells Jamaica deal with corruption. The article elaborated on addressing public sector governance shortcomings. Greg Christie, in his 2017 Gleaner article, Jamaica's Future Choked by Cancer of Corruption, said, "Corruption distorts financial markets, reduces investor confidence, and stunts business activity." Executive Director of the National Integrity Action, Professor Trevor Monroe, has been quoted saying that endemic corruption in Jamaica hinders economic growth. He also says the Jamaican economy could be 3 and 10 times its current size if crime and corruption were brought under control. But among all these indicators, environmental development, once proving sustainable, is simply not an obstacle to economic growth, but rather sustainable environmental development is a driver, a friend, a facilitator of economic growth. I thank you for your time.
Thank you very much to Chantal Blair Gooden and Twyla Whelan of JIF. Twyla. Thank you, Twyla Whelan. All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, we are awaiting the replies from the 2 teams. We know that arguments were posited on both sides, and I realized that at some points in time, the audience was getting quite involved and very excited. We are giving the teams 1 minute now to finalize their replies, and then we will conclude the debates. We'll take the response from side opposition first, and then the proposition will conclude the motion that stands in their name. So after a minute, and the judges will indicate, side opposition will invite you to table your reply.
Madam Chairman, Grandma always says, patience, cricket. Remember my opponents that bubbles burst when you least expect them. And we basically just pop bubble wrap, right? I do. So we're not going to bubble up irresponsibly. We're all in agreement that we're all in agreement that the environment must be developed for economic growth. But apparently you don't understand the concept of sustainable development. We're agreeing with you that sustainable development must take place, but it must take place responsibly. The plastic ban, friends, is a many-step process. And if we talk about economic growth, we know that the wage to GDP ratio can come down significantly if some jobs come off the wage bill. We need not try to put a recycling plant on the wage bill as well. That is the purview of the private sector. Let's educate you if you didn't know. The government facilitates and the private sector implements as it relates to economic growth. Logistics in Jamaica, my friend, has actually begun the hubbing of logistics. Because as Professor Fritz Pinnock, president of the Caribbean Maritime University, has been saying in his Logistics 101 rounds, the logistics hub is not a place. It's not something that you wait for to happen. So the special economic zones that are being set up, one of which is being set up at Gisco Alpart, is a part of the logistics hub that we speak of and that fourth node that Jamaica is seeking to achieve. You talk about all these cars on the road. How responsible have we been in terms of putting all of these cars on the road? We're talking about an increase in carbon emissions. We're now at the point of going into the carbon market, the global carbon market, where we sell our capacity to countries that need it because of the size of their development. If we keep importing cars responsibly, friends, we're going to deplete our ability to earn on the international market in the carbon market. So environmental protection is not about, environmental protection is not environmental development, as you seem to be saying. Environmental development, let me tell you, the North-South Highway that allows somebody to live in Ocho Rios and work in Kingston, Mandela Highway that is almost complete, the special economic zones, the Ferris to Macfield main road in between Westmoreland and St. Elizabeth, the 3 miles flyover, when was the last time you looked at that? The 8,000 room development by Amterra that the Prime Minister opened the other day. And in health, Princess Margaret Hospital, Linseed Hospital, St. Anne's Bay Hospital, Bustamante Hospital have all been upgraded recently. That's economic development. Let me just leave this with you, my friends. Please ask them to fix the elevators at KPH and at Jubilee so that pregnant women are not climbing the stairs.
Mr. Speaker, as the opposition tries to misinform you, as it is their duty be the JIS, to give you fake news, let me inform you that there is, Mr. Speaker, a direct connection between that of natural use of our resources in our natural capital in connection to our economy. Now, the University of Iceland states that there is a direct connection between lack of usage of natural resources in countries that have abundance, it being exhibited by them having more crime. Now, the converse reality to that is, if we utilized it, our governments would have been less corrupt, we'll have less crime, and more educated people. Mr. Speaker, the idea of sustainability should not impede economic growth. We are saying that, we posit, it is the measures used to attain sustainability that becomes the obstacle. It's not the question. We look at our natural resources and capital. We want to invest in our people. Let us invest in our lands. Stop saying let us not use our natural resources, which is what you're saying by saying that we should sustain them and preserve them for absolutely no use. Let us, in a responsible way, use, promote, and advertise our natural resources, use our natural capital, generate the income, opportunity, and investment needed to actualize our goals by Vision 2030. By Vision 2030, I posit, through the use of our natural resources, whether it has been the implementation of the logistics hub, which is not a specific place, but can be done anywhere, and you said that we should not, we should have, because it could have produced billions of dollars in what? Employment, investment, in order to develop sustainable means of actually keeping the hub here in Jamaica. It provided or provides the access to international markets. You are saying, Mr. Speaker, my opponents, that we should preserve the Goat Island. What are we really preserving? Let us preserve our environment by usage responsibly. If we do not use it, we are creating an obstacle for ourselves, for our development, for our future children, and the environment in the long run. Lack of use creates disaster. Disasters are obstacles, whether they are factual, figurative, material, or non-material. They will slow down progress. That, by definition, is an obstacle. Environmental development, the lack of use, is an obstacle. I rest my case.
Who has won this debate? Is it the team from Victoria Jubilee Hospital? Or the team from the Jamaica Information Service? Well, despite your great support, that decision rests in the hands of the judges. Ladies and gentlemen, let us thank Deandra Facey, Desiree Denton Sadler, and Chantal Blair Gooden of Victoria Jubilee Hospital. And let's also thank for their contributions to this interesting match, Peter Gay Hodges, Charnel Henry, and Twyla Whelan of Jamaica Information Service. At the end of the day, we will learn from the judges which team clinched the winnings of this match. Thank you very much, teams, and I'll ask you to give them a round of applause as they leave the stage. Well played, ladies. Sorry about the fake news. We have seen worse. You're so bad. Killing the game. From the first match. Okay. And that award goes to Desiree Denton Sadler. SA, that's the Jamaica Civil Service Association Best Speaker Prize for the Public Sector Debate Competition for 2019 goes to Charnel Henry of Team JIS. And she receives a cash award of $25,000 from the JCSA. During the competition, Charnel would have been the best speaker in 2 matches. And in any other matches, she would have gotten great speaker scores. Congratulations, Charnel Henry. Thank you very much, Anil Grant. Winner of the playoff. 3rd place in the public sector debate competition for 2019 is the team from a government agency, the Jamaica Information Service. Congratulations, Team JIS.